14 mornings, the hand knew where to go, the shoes by the door, the notebook on the table, the instrument leaned in its corner, and it went there without argument. Then one day it did not. A late night, a sick child, work that ran past dark, or nothing worth naming at all, simple forgetting until the lights were already off. The next morning that same hand reaches out, and this time it reaches to not bother. And a small cold thought arrives ahead of the coffee that the whole thing is already over. Strangely, the one day that went missing feels heavier now than the 14 kept days ever felt light. Give the practice its real name because in a life it is never an abstraction. 2 weeks ago something started, the 10-minute run before the shower, or the language app over breakfast, or the page written before the day could crowd it out, or the guitar for a quarter of an hour after dinner. 14 days went by, one after another, real and unremarkable, none of them heroic, each of them done. Then a single day arrived with its own weather and took the slot. The meeting that ran long, the night that collapsed into exhaustion, the child who needed holding until midnight. The day ended, the thing did not get done, and by itself that is a small and ordinary fact. Notice the ordinariness of those 14 days because the mind is about to deny it. None of them were triumphs. The run was slow, the app was 10 half-attentive minutes, the page was mediocre and known to be mediocre while it was being written. That is what a real practice looks like from the inside, unglamorous, a little dull. Done anyway, and it is precisely that plain, earned ordinariness that gets erased the moment the 15th morning goes wrong. The next morning is where the trouble actually lives. Reaching for the shoes, the mind offers reasons to stop now, and every one of them sounds responsible, even adult. Clearly I can't keep this up, says the first, because look, I already didn't. If I were really serious about it, says the second, I would not have let a single day slip. The whole point was the streak, says the third. And the streak is gone now, so what is even left to protect? And the quieter one, underneath the rest. Better to admit early that I'm simply not a person who does these things, than to be shown it later. Each of those sentences is sincere. Each is spoken in the calm voice of someone facing facts. And each depends, without ever saying so, on a single hidden move. That the missed day is not being read as an event at all, but as evidence. Evidence about the kind of person doing the reaching. The 14 days, meanwhile, get quietly relabeled. No longer 14 real mornings that genuinely happened, but a fluke, a burst of early enthusiasm that was always going to run out, now proven to have run out on schedule. Two different things have been folded into one, and the folding is the whole problem. The first is a single missed action, a run not run, a page not written on one particular Tuesday. The second is a verdict on a character. I am someone who cannot finish what I start. A missed action is small, dated, and finished. A verdict is total, and it claims to explain everything backward and forward at once. Sliding the one into the other feels like honesty, like refusing to lie to oneself, and that is exactly what makes it so hard to catch. The wish underneath all this is not the trouble. Wanting to be consistent, wanting the run and the pages and the practice to hold, is a clean and worthy thing, and nothing here asks anyone to give it up. The trouble is the rule that got bolted silently to the wish while no one was looking. That one gap voids the practice and exposes the person. Pull the wish and the rule apart, and the morning already looks different. The wish says keep going. The rule says there is nothing left to keep. Only one of them is telling the truth, and the loud one is lying. What it does not explain is the mechanics. How a single ordinary gap manages to grow, in the space of one night, into everything is ruined, and I was never capable of this. Watch the gap become a verdict, one step at a time, Because the growth is neither magic nor a moral fact. It is a sequence, and a sequence can be laid out on the table. It starts before any day is even missed, when the habit gets quietly fastened to a number. The run becomes the count of runs. The pages become the streak of days with pages. Somewhere in there, the meaning of success changes shape from "did I do the thing today," which is about an action, to "is the count still unbroken," which is about a record. And no one announces the swap. Then the day is missed and the arithmetic does its cold work. A single absence drops the count to 0. And because the scoring was all or nothing from the start, one gap does not read as 14 days out of 15. It reads as total loss. 14 and then 0, and the 14 might as well not have happened, because the only number the scoreboard shows now is the one sitting at the bottom. A 0, though, demands a reason, and the mind reaches for the cheapest one on the shelf. The smallest, most local explanation, "I had a genuinely hard Tuesday," is somehow never the one that gets picked up. The mind grabs the largest, most sweeping account instead. Not the Tuesday, but the self. I am someone who cannot stick to anything. A sentence about one day has become a sentence about a whole person. That verdict, once signed, gets applied in both directions. Backward, it relabels the 14 days. If I am someone who cannot, then those 2 weeks were never real progress. Only luck, novelty, the beginner's shine that always wears off. So there is nothing behind me worth defending. Forward, it poisons what is coming. If I am someone who cannot, then continuing is a little pointless and faintly embarrassing. And stopping now is not defeat but maturity. A clear-eyed person declining to chase what was never going to work. The hinge is the part worth slowing down for. Quitting, at exactly this point, protects the verdict. As long as the practice stays abandoned, I can't keep habits remains true, tidy and untested. A return tomorrow morning would be a counterexample. A 15th day that simply disproves the whole sentence. And so the verdict, in order to survive, quietly arranges for that counterexample never to arrive. It gets a person to quit before the evidence against it can be produced. The collapse feels like honesty and is actually self-defense. The self-defense of an idea protecting itself from a fact. 2 structural things finish the job. All or nothing scoring means any practice, however well it is going, sits permanently one single day away from 0, which means it is built to collapse eventually. Not by accident, but by design. Because a perfect record is the only state it counts as alive. And the global verdict about the self stays unfalsifiable, for exactly as long as the quitting continues. Because the one thing that could ever prove it wrong, a single returned morning, is the one thing that refusing to return guarantees you never hand it. The missed day did not cause any of this. The scoreboard and the verdict did, and they keep the whole engine running, by making sure the test is never actually taken. Set against all that machinery, walking away from one small habit can look almost free. A run skipped, a notebook closed, nothing anyone else will ever notice. Followed out over time, though, it turns out to run a long and itemized bill, and the charges are worth naming one at a time. The first cost is an archive. Rarely is it one habit standing alone. It tends to be a pattern. The run abandoned at its first gap in spring. The language app at its first gap in summer. The journal, the guitar, each dropped the first morning it was missed. What accumulates across those attempts is not a skill and not a fitness. It is a growing file of evidence, every page of it self-supplied, that this is a person who cannot finish anything. The cruel part is the authorship. The verdict that started the quitting gets confirmed by the quitting, and the track record that seems to prove I can't keep habits was built, entry by entry, out of the decisions to stop. A second cost is the compounding that never gets to begin. Almost nothing worth doing pays out inside a single fortnight. fitness, fluency, a finished manuscript, a callus on the fingertips. All live in 14 days plus 14 plus 14. In the boring middle stretch long after the novelty is gone. Resetting to zero at every gap means always rerunning day one and never arriving at the part where the thing finally works. A practice abandoned before it pays never gets the chance to prove it was worth keeping, which loops straight back and confirms the old story. That it wasn't, that none of them ever are. The third charge is the strangest piece of accounting in the whole affair. The gap itself cost exactly 1 day. One run, one set of pages, genuinely gone and not coming back. But the verdict charges the next day too, and the day after that, and the fortnight after those. Because quitting is precisely what converts one missed day into 30. A person ends up billing themselves a month for a debt of 1, and calling the overcharge honesty, heaviest of all. Every future day gets weighed down in advance. Once a single gap counts as catastrophe, each morning has to carry the entire streak's worth of stakes at once. And a practice loaded like that turns anxious and brittle. The habit stops being a thing done and becomes a thing defended. And people begin, without quite admitting it, to avoid the practice on hard days. Not out of laziness, but to protect the number from a day that might spoil it. So that the fear of breaking the streak becomes, in the end, the very thing that breaks it. A fifth cost is quieter and longer lived than the rest. Each abandoned attempt does not merely close a habit, it relabels a whole territory as not for me. Running becomes a thing other people do. Writing becomes a talent I turned out not to have. The language, the instrument, the early mornings. One by one they get fired on the closed, and the map of what a person even considers possible for themselves shrinks by one region every time a fortnight ends in a verdict. Years on, the shrinking is invisible, because no one grieves a possibility they have already stopped seeing. None of these is dramatic on any given morning, which is exactly why the bill goes unread. A skip to run costs almost nothing today. A file of abandoned attempts, a compounding that never starts. 1 day charge as 30, every remaining morning made heavier. And the slow closing of all possibilities, those are the real invoice. And it is settled slowly enough that the settling never quite registers as a choice. All of which seems to point one clean way. Stop treating a gap as a disaster, and the disaster stops. Whether that means consistency itself was never the point, and a person may now skip as freely as they like, is the harder question, and it deserves its strongest form. The clean conclusion has a problem, and honesty means handing it the microphone before answering it. Consistency is not nothing. For a great many habits, the near daily repetition is not decoration on the method, it is the method. No one gets fit on 3 heroic sessions and a month of silence. No one becomes fluent by opening the app on inspired afternoons. The body and the ear are built by showing up almost every day. And the streak, for all its traps, is a real and useful scaffold that guards a fragile new habit against 1,000 small and reasonable not-todays. A second worry cuts sharper, and it is aimed at the reframe itself. If one missed day is fine hardens into a standing rule, it can quietly become a permission slip. A day off today because a day off is fine. A day off tomorrow on the same generous grounds. And returning is what matters, slowly turns into the comfortable thing, a person tells themselves, while the habit dies of 100 forgivable exceptions. The discomfort after a missed day, the very sting this whole essay is circling, might be doing honest work. It keeps a person awake to the slip. It is often exactly what drags them back the next morning. Numb that, and the thing that holds a person back at all may go quiet with it. These are not weak objections, and they do not get waved away. Some practices really are non-negotiable in a way the argument has to respect. The medication taken at the same hour, the insulin, the blood pressure pill. There, the near daily is not scaffolding to be held loosely. because a gap has real physical consequence, and soothing talk of renewable beginnings would be misplaced and even dangerous. Give all of that its full weight before going 1 inch further. What survives, when the weight has been fully given, is a distinction fine but load-bearing. Consistency held as a means is daily repetition pursued because it builds the thing, valued for its results, and held loosely enough to survive a single gap without drama. The streak held as an identity is the count become the point, the unbroken number standing in for the self, so that its loss reads instantly as a verdict on the person. The first is a tool. The second is a trap wearing the tool's clothes, and telling them apart is the whole matter. Notice what the reframe therefore does not say. It does not say skipping costs nothing, missing genuinely costs something real, precisely the lost compounding counted a moment ago, 1 day's worth of the thing not built. What it says is narrower and firmer, that the cost of 1 missed day is exactly 1 missed day, not the practice and not the character, and the permission slip worry answers itself the moment the test is set right, because the test is behavior, not feeling. Returning is not a sentence anyone recites, it is the smallest version of the thing actually done today. A person who believes deeply in returning and does not return has, in plain fact, quit. Belief is not the practice. A person who returns has not quit, whatever they happen to feel. The discomfort on this test is welcome. Let it be the nudge that gets you back tomorrow. It curdles into the trap at one moment only, when it stops being a nudge back and gets used instead as evidence to stop, which leaves the thing the distinction cannot yet explain. Why a cost of 1 single day should go on feeling, morning after morning, like the cost of the whole endeavor, and what it would actually take to change that. Marcus Aurelius kept a private notebook while running an empire, and the striking thing in it is how often he is simply talking himself into beginning again. He is not a man recording an unbroken record of virtue. He is a man who keeps falling short of his own standard, and keeps coming back to it. In the 5th book he writes about the cold morning reluctance to get up and do the work a human being is made for, and his answer to that reluctance is not a demand for a perfect record. It is to rise and do the work anyway. Elsewhere he tells himself, in effect, that when he is knocked off course by his own temper or laziness, he should return to his principles at once, not despise himself for the lapse, and be content if most of his conduct is worthy of a human being. The instruction, again and again, is never keep the chain intact. The instruction is return, set the missed day against that, and the practice quietly changes category, and the change of category is the entire turn. The habit has been treated all along as one continuous object, whose defining property is being whole, and whose worth is measured in length. On that picture, a gap does not merely dent the object. It destroys the kind of thing it is, because an unbroken chain and a broken chain are 2 different categories. And once it breaks, there is nothing of the first kind left, only 0, and the choice to start a new one or walk away. Reclassify it honestly though, and the fragile object was never there to begin with. A practice is not one continuous thing at all. It is a sequence of separate acts, each of them complete on its own day. Yesterday's run did its work yesterday, in the body, on the day it happened, and today's absence cannot reach back and undo it. Today's run is a fresh act, newly available this morning, not a 15th link that can now never exist, because there was never a chain for it to be the 15th link of. On this accounting, a missed day simply cannot ruin the practice, for the plain reason that there was never a single breakable object to ruin, only a choice that comes up again every morning, and has come up again this one. Folded inside that is the deeper Stoic cut. Virtue lives in the returning and never in the record. The unbroken streak depends entirely on days that have already passed and cannot be reached. It is made of the past and the past is precisely the thing outside anyone's power. The return depends only on today, which is the one thing in reach, and it is available on every single day, including the morning after a gap and the morning after 10 of them. So the question a person is actually facing turns over. Not how do I restore the streak I broke, which looks backward at what cannot be altered and has honestly no answer. But will I do the smallest version once today, which looks at the one thing within reach and can simply be done. A row of knitting shows the shape of the mistake and can then be set back down. Drop a stitch and the garment is not ruined. One loop slipped and the work goes on from the next loop, while every row already knitted stays exactly where it is. The rows behind do not unravel because a single stitch was missed. The point is not the knitting. The point is that a missed day gets treated as though the whole piece must be pulled out and started over, when in truth one loop slipped, and the next is already sitting on the needle. What that leaves unsettled is the ordinary morning itself, the hand at the shoes, the gap behind it, and exactly what a person does there and what returning honestly cannot promise to fix. Seeing the practice differently settles nothing on its own until it can be carried into the actual morning, the real one with the cold floor and the reaching hand. What carries it there is a short routine of 4 moves, blunt and simple enough to follow on a discouraged Tuesday, when nothing feels worth the effort. Refuse the catch-up first. Do not run double to make up the missed run. Do not write yesterday's pages on top of today's. Do not do 20 minutes to repay the 10 that were skipped. Catch-up looks like diligence and is actually the streak logic sneaking back in the side door, because it treats the gap as a debt owed, and the record as a thing to be restored, and it usually collapses under its own weight, and hands the verdict fresh proof. Yesterday is gone. Let it be gone. That is not defeat. It is only the truth about yesterday. Refuse the punishment next. No tax of self-contempt for the lapse. No, now I have to be twice as strict to deserve this. Marcus was explicit on exactly this point. Return and do not despise yourself for having slipped. And the reason is practical rather than gentle. The punishment is only the same verdict again. I am someone who fails, dressed in the costume of discipline, so it can pass for a virtue. Then do the smallest version once. Not the whole habit restored to full size, the floor of it. 1 page. 1 minute on the app. The shoes on, a walk to the corner and back. The size genuinely does not matter, because the smallest version is already a complete return, and a complete return reopens the sequence. A single honest loop put back on the needle is the return itself, not the repair of the row behind it, and then let the count go. Do not open a fresh streak counter and rearm the very trap that just went off. If anything at all is going to be measured, measure whether you returned after a gap, because that, not the length of any unbroken run, is the only repetition that actually builds the thing you wanted. A quiet discovery tends to follow. After a few honest returns, the missed day stops frightening you. Not because a spotless record was finally achieved, but because a gap has stopped meaning anything beyond a gap, and a practice that can absorb a gap and go on is, in the end, the only kind that lasts. The limits are worth stating flatly, without any softening. The smallest version cannot recover the lost day's progress. That day's compounding is genuinely gone, and pretending otherwise is only the catch-up trap in a nicer coat. It will not make anyone consistent by tomorrow. Returning is a repeated act, not a switch thrown once, and there will be more gaps and more mornings of having to return again. It does not excuse a habit quietly dying of 100 skips. A person doing not even the smallest version has in fact quit, and the honest thing is to name that plainly rather than hide inside returning is what matters. It cannot promise the goal, the finished book, the fluent tongue, the changed body, because outcomes hang on far more than showing up. What it guarantees is the single thing the streak never could. That one missed day can no longer end the practice, because the practice was never the streak to begin with. The hand reaches again, on another ordinary morning, toward the shoes or the notebook it decided last night not to bother with. The gap is real. Yesterday did end without a thing. What has changed is the question waiting there at the door. No longer did I ruin it. Is the streak dead? A question that only ever looked backward at a record it could not reach. But simply, will I do the smallest version once today? The 14 days were 14 real and complete days, and nothing about yesterday reached back to erase a single one of them. The missed day was an event. Everything is ruined, I'm incapable, was a verdict added on top of it. A verdict, it turns out, about a fragile chain that never existed. A promise to hold an unbroken streak was always a promise no one can keep, and a poor measure of a life besides. The promise worth making, if there is one, was only ever to return to the work, and a gap does not break that promise. That promise is kept on exactly the mornings that follow a gap, in the smallest version done once. Yesterday cannot be recovered, today can be begun, and beginning again is not the practice failing. Beginning again is the practice. Name the habit you dropped after a single missed day, and the smallest version of it you could do once today. These essays follow one thought all the way through, one at a time. Subscribe if that is worth an evening, and stay a while.